Hey everybody, so we're going to do a brief tour of the gadget. This is the front of the device, ostensibly. We've got our display here. You can see our user interface, and it's currently in morale mode. We'll go in a little bit deeper on how that works in a minute. This is a dimmer off of some LED strip lights that I've rewired. So one of them is a dimmer, the other is a constant 12 volts, which we need for the breakout board that drives the solenoid and the servo, as well as the lights are driven by the dimmer. This is the USB-C connector. This is pretty standard, but it is a higher amount of current. This is what is provided with the Raspberry Pi. Don't use just any USB-C off the shelf. You likely won't get enough current. This is the servo, the cable that goes to the servo. Okay, so you see we've got some Molex connectors here that we created. And basically the way that this works is in the back here is where the dice are returned. We have a dice tray, and I'll flip it around and do a whole explanation of the insides in a moment. But for instance, we're in morale mode. Let's say we want to hit on 9s. It says hitting on 9s. Ow! Drop a couple dice in the top. Here. Reads them, drops them. Okay. Now, if we flip it around, this is where the interesting bits happen. Okay, so for starters, take the top out. Okay. This is a 3D printed ramp. It's got a little bit of some plastic card on there and some drawer liner just to keep it smooth and low noise. This is 3D printed, so you can see this little ridge there clamps onto the back of the, well, I guess it's the front, but the edge. Okay, this is the door that pops open. Yeah, I'm still reading stuff. We're going to get a lot of those, actually. Let me turn the software off while we're doing that. I'll explain in a second why that's doing that. Okay, so this is the door that comes off. You see it has a ramp on it to keep the dice from just falling straight down there. This will kick them out so they get a little bit more mixed up and keeps them from falling directly on the edge of the trap door at the bottom. And this is just masonite. Piece of plywood cut at an angle, and then more drawer liner wrapped around it. There's a piece of electrical tape at the bottom here. That's just to keep light spillage from flowing in. Okay. So here we have, this is our display output. This drives the display and the inputs from the touchscreen. Behind this, compact flash storage. And here we have two, let me zoom in a little bit on this, see if we can get in there. Okay. Underneath this is a standard Raspberry Pi. Okay, and that's where you see the USB-C cable going to power it. On top of it is a breakout board. And this is a stepper motor breakout board. And so this is designed to drive stepper motors, servos, anything that you need a clean power signal off of. So here, this is, if you remember from the other side, we had two barrel connector inputs. This one is a straight 12 volts, and this is the one that's on the dimmer. So you can see the dimmer, brighter, darker, etc. Now I could lock that in. I basically took a Sharpie and drew on the dimmer where the correct position is. But while I was prototyping, it was pretty useful while I'm adjusting the camera aperture and autofocus and auto exposure settings to have that dimmer there. So the other 12 volts comes in, powers the board here, and the board sends out two things that we're interested in. One is signal to drive the servo, which is what actually triggers the trapdoor. And the other is a signal to fire the solenoid. And the solenoid is a latch that supports the trapdoor when it is not being actuated. Okay, so if we back out again, you can actually see that. Okay. So down here, and this is hard to see because it's all black, but that's kind of by design, right? We want nice high contrast for our dice. This is a 3D printed bracket that houses a solenoid. Okay, and you can see how the trapdoor flips up here. Let me tilt this forward actually. The trapdoor sits up here and still can't see that. Alright, so here's the trapdoor. Let's see if I can pop it from the back. There's the trapdoor, and then here's the solenoid switch right here. So that releases and lets the trapdoor fall back down. And then when it resets, the trapdoor comes up above it, the latch pops out, and then it just rests on it like that. And this turned out to be really, really important because what this does is this makes sure there's no torque going on the servo unless it's driving the trapdoor. That turned out to be a really, really important problem to solve. And then look at the bottom here. You can kind of see the way that this is set up. So here's our trapdoor. And you can see these cams under here. This is a spacer block that I put in. This is another thing that I discovered on my last minute failure. And that was that if this is a resin bracket for the servo that I 3D printed. And if it shrinks or changes shape or something like that, and this becomes loose, the servo is now no longer square to the cammed gears here that are actually driving it. So all this is, oh no, I did screw this in. This is a wedge. This is just a block of wood that pushes the servo back in there, and if I need to take it out, I have to unscrew it on this side. But what it does is it keeps it flush inside the bracket, which keeps it square to the gears, which makes sure that the teeth will always be perpendicular and not rip. Because again, I'm using the ABS-like resin, which is a lot tougher than regular resin, but it's still nothing like an FDM print would produce. Okay, so I wonder if we can get this. Let's turn the software on again, why not? So you can actually see it go. Now, this is going to be a little bit tricky because you will get false readings if this is not open. All right, so the whole point of this door here is to really tightly control our lighting. So now you can imagine inside you have a very, very dark space, and you have your only source of light is your dimmable light that is mounted directly behind the camera. Okay? But we'll give it a shot. This is the camera. I probably didn't introduce the camera. The camera's really important. This bracket was the result of me overthinking this half a dozen times. Before, I had this in there. So this would mount to a thing, the camera would mount to this, and then you could position it wherever you wanted. And that was too clever by half because you actually don't want it to be positioned or positionable once you have it fixed. The trick is getting it fixed and having it optimally painted, or having your scene optimally painted across the sensor. Alright, so let's turn the software back on. I'm VNC'd into it from my laptop here. Okay, and that's just kind of its initialization. So now we're started up. Now it's like, okay, I'm waiting for some dice. So if we give it some dice, you see it's already struggling with the read because its lighting conditions are not so great. There we go. So basically what the camera is doing is it's reading blobs and clustering them, and it will try to get, I think it's 3 shots that are consistent before it says like, okay, the image is stabilized. And so if you don't have your lighting controlled really well, it's not going to stabilize well. So that's what we're saying. So that's it. It's basically just wash, rinse, repeat. Throw dice in the top. Add entropy to your running bit array. And return. So now, this is what the UI looks like. And you're basically going to choose either if you're going to roll for damage, you're going to roll for morale. That door is not closed all the way. We're getting some interference. But essentially all you do is choose your target number, hitting on 9s, roll it. What happened? Oh, the lights are off. Amazing how sensitive that is. And then if you want to switch to damage, you say like, okay, I'm hitting on 4s. So you take your fistful of dice here, drop them in there, it reads them all, and says like, okay, you got 2 hits, you're hitting on 4s, you rolled 8 dice, one of them was a 6. Great. Okay. So that's pretty much it for the UI. It starts off and it tells you what Git SHA you're running. And it will warn you if you didn't have your ceremony state added to it. So obviously I'm recording this after the ceremony. I don't have a pre-state loaded, but that was handy the night of just to confirm that like, yep, we found it. Yeah. So back to the physical tour.